Her parents flitted between various homes in London, Sussex, and Inishannon in County Cork, Ireland, where her father, Morton Fruin, owned a landed estate on the banks of the River Bandon. His speculative financial ventures frequently crashed, bankruptcy always threatened, and not for nothing was he mockingly dubbed Mortal Ruin. Unlike her two brothers, who were privileged with an Eton education, Claire suffered the usual homeschooling reserved for girls of her class, and ended up at a convent in Paris and a finishing school in Germany. At age 17, she was taken to London to enter society. The three Jerome sisters were living together in a cluster of houses on Great Cumberland Place, and every morning Claire would cross the street to visit Jenny and read out loud to her the Times editorial while she took breakfast. Lady Randolph also coached her on becoming a debutante. "My Aunt Jenny became my second mother," Claire remembered. "I was a wild animal being tamed." She saw her cousin Winston regularly at family events, but he was a full decade older and often seemed distant and intimidating. The cousin she felt closest to was John Leslie, the son of her Aunt Leonie and Sir John Leslie of Glasloch in County Monaghan, Ireland, who owned an estate of almost 50,000 acres. Born in the same month and year as each other, the cousins shared an artistic and rebellious streak. In his 20s, John declared for Irish Home Rule, changed his name to its Irish variant Shane, and formally embraced Catholicism. It took Claire longer to find herself. Her literary ambitions received scant encouragement, and unfulfilled as a social butterfly, at age 25 she married William, but always known as Wilfrid, Sheridan, a London stockbroker and descendant of the playwright Richard Brinsley Sheridan, of whom, revealingly, she had never heard. In 1912 she gave birth to a daughter. Another quickly followed, but was sickly from birth and soon died of meningitis. A year later, her husband was killed at the Battle of Loos, only days after the birth of their third child, a son. Claire was now a war widow, with two small children to support. At this point, she turned to her cousin Winston. Once before, from the dismal convent in Paris, she had written to him about her misery and received a sympathetic, if patronizing, response. "My dear Claire," he wrote, "do not be low-spirited. It is something, after all, to be fed and clothed and sheltered, more than most people in the world, without constant and unwearying toil. Cultivate a philosophical disposition, grow pretty and wise and good." Now she asked her cousin to find out the details of her husband's death. Winston had liked Wilfrid, whose body was missing in German-held territory, and did his best to find out more, but without success. Dressed in her black widow's weeds, and with her baby boy and small daughter accompanied by a governess, shortly before Christmas 1915, Claire travelled to London. Churchill was with his regiment on the Western Front, and for a few nights she stayed with a sympathetic Clementine at Jack and Gooney's Cromwell Road house. "My darling," reported Clementine to her husband, "I don't know how one bears such things. I feel like I could not weather such a blow. She has a beautiful little son, 8 weeks old, but her poor black puss, Wilfrid, sleeps in Flanders." Claire was also broke. On his return to London, Winston did what he could to help. Her problem was that the widows of men who had volunteered for service did not qualify for pensions. Wilfrid's parents lived on a fixed income, and her own father, as usual, was in a financially fragile state. Eventually, the War Office gave her a pension of £250 a year. Together with support from her aunts Jenny and Leonie, this was just about enough to live on. But she needed a life, and found it in art. Churchill was also just discovering its magic, and it brought them closer. Sculpture, rather than painting, was her salvation. Grieving over the loss of her infant daughter, she had found unexpected comfort and pleasure in working with clay to make the child a memorial. Art schools and classes followed, and thanks to family connections and friends in high places, she received tuition and advice from some of the leading sculptors of the day. Sitting for Jacob Epstein, she intently observed him at work and adopted some of his revolutionary technique.